Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Open Observability Talks. I'm your host, Dotan Horovits, and here at Open Observability Talks, we talk about anything DevOps, observability, and open source. So may the open source be with you. And if you are joining us on the live stream on YouTube or Twitch, do feel free to share questions and comments on the chat. Definitely a great opportunity to do that. And with that, let's move on to today's episode. Next month is Free Open Source Software Month. And today, I'm going to host Stefano Maffulli, the Executive Director of the Open Source Initiative, the guardian of the open source definition, if you like. I'm curious to hear from him about the new open source AI definition that was recently released and the new white paper that's actually just being published about the topic these days. So hot off the press. Looking forward to hearing more about that. Hey, Stefano. How's it
Hello.
going?
Hi, Dotan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. Where are you joining us from?
Right now, I'm in Venice, Italy, although this background is from my hometown. It's down south in southern Italy.
It's a great background, and I actually am very happy to, we've been chatting and being in contact for so long that funny that I haven't had the chance to have you on the show so far. And I just mentioned next month's Free Open Source Software Month. I just remembered before the talk about last year's Free Open Source Software Month. You and I were together at FOSS, and we were celebrating the 25th anniversary of open source with some big major announcements, among which was also, I think, the teaser for the AI section. So interesting closure of the things. 25 years. That's really really amazing to think about that. And really, the
Right.
core of open source is the open source definition, which Guardian is the OSI, the open source definition. So do you want to tell us, I know a long period, but maybe today, what's the role of the OSI today as you view it in a nutshell for those who don't know the concept?
A very good point. Yeah, last year, FOSDEM was an incredible year celebrating milestone anniversary. And this year is going to be another one. And we're really starting to think about the next big anniversary, the 30 years celebration. So open source, we use the term stewards. The open source initiative is the steward, the maintainer of the open source definition. That is the 10 points checklist that is used by lawyers mostly, or legally minded individuals, to review licenses, which are legal documents that are used to grant freedoms rather than deprive users of rights that they could exercise. The open source definition came out after 20 plus years of experience from the free software movement, and the Free Software Foundation started all of that with Richard Stallman in the late 80s. They're a much older organization, but we pretty much share the same roots and the same beliefs that any user of software should receive the rights and the means to use, modify, share without the software, the programs, without having to ask for permissions. And that is the root that has created this fantastic ecosystem that is worth, according to some studies, up to $8.8 trillion. So it's a massive amount of value being generated by different individuals and corporations at very different levels all over the world. And it's all based on that concept. You don't have to ask for permissions to innovate, to collaborate. And it's a fantastic mechanism that we're trying to defend. And we defend it based on the experience, right? We didn't come up with a definition that was simply written down by an individual, smart individual working in a vacuum, right? It was done after the open source definition came out, after years of experience, decades of practice of releasing software and granting users the freedoms to do whatever they wanted with it, including making money with it, right? Including selling their software. And it sounds counterintuitive today, but it's what actually was happening. And so we've been doing that, but we have expanded our focus. Your question was also, what is it today that we're doing, right? The list of licenses changes still, the list of approved licenses, but it's not the only thing that we do. That's our core mission, but we also have expanded into two more areas. One is in the license review, we have three programs. One is called Licensing and Legal, where we do the core activities of reviewing licenses, but we also host a project called Clearly Defined, which for observability is probably very interesting. It's a way to make sure that the information about the packages that you are ingesting and consuming in your bill of material is actually carrying the right information about the licenses. Then we have another program called Policy and Standards. In this program, we have been monitoring the policy space and making sure that the community knows about the impact of regulation in the United States and Europe. And this is a big effort that we have introduced a few years ago after a lot of attempts from regulators to change the way software was being introduced in new spaces like network operations, for example, or wireless communication. There is a lot more software than there used to be, and therefore we need to watch out for what is happening, what regulators are doing. And then the last piece is outreach and research. In this space, we keep an eye, we educate the public about the value of open source. We participate to conferences. We join podcasts and streams like yours to talk about what we do, to talk about the importance of the open source definition and the freedoms that it carries to create a vast
a lot of
ecosystem.
this being done, definitely. It's amazing, and I think it's even becoming even more relevant these days with what we've seen in the past few years, maybe even more so the last year. I call it when your open source turns to the dark side, or moves over to the dark side. Sorry for being a Star Wars geek, but it's really I just published an article summarizing 2024. Now we're beginning of 2025, and looking back at this, I call it a very turbulent year, seeing great disturbance in the force, if you will. We saw what happened with Redis changing licenses and Puppet changes. And then we saw, on the other hand, we saw also what I call the community strikes back. We saw the Valky fork of Redis emerges and gains momentum, and even joining as a foundational open source within the Linux Foundation. We had a dedicated episode here on this. And others, even more veteran from forks like OpenTofu and OpenBao reaching general availability. So you see also not just the initiation, but actually sustainability and reaching this point of maturity. So I'm actually curious, when you look at these past years and these trends, whether it with relicensing or all sorts of changing terms of use and service terms and all the other tweaks that we see, various ways of turning to the dark side. How do you see this, and what's your expectation? Should we expect to see more of that, or is that just a phase, or something that is likely to increase? How do you interpret that?
I mean, it's always been there's always been this tension inside the free software and the open source communities, however you want to label them. They're the same word in my mind. I mean, they carry the same values. There's always been tension between enabling open innovation and, on the other side, corporations wanting to have exclusive exploitation rights, economic exploitation rights. And the pendulum keeps on swinging from one side to the other. I don't think that we have seen anything new recently. It's a lot of corporations trying some visible corporations gaining enough momentum and ending their bootstrapping phase with open source, and all of a sudden they want to, their investors, they're pushing them to increase that economic squeeze that they have on the market share that they have gained. And it's one of our roles of educational in the educational role is to remind corporations that it's okay to be greedy, but it's not okay to I was going to use an Italian sentence that doesn't translate well in English, but I'm going to say it's not okay to spit in the plate where you eat, right? It's when we looked at a lot of the corporations and products that these corporations have been trying to change the licenses for, we noticed with analysis through code analysis tools and copyright analysis tools, we noticed that a lot of the products, like even to significant percentages, the copyright is held by large corporations like Google, Adobe, Meta, Facebook, and others. So the full solutions that these companies are shipping to the customers are not 100% written by the corporations themselves. So when it comes to saying like, Reddit has, we write most of Reddit, or we write most of, I don't want to mention, what was Tofu and not Tofu, right, HashiCorp stuff. Like, okay, you wrote 70%, but in some cases we've seen percentages dropping below 10%, especially for JavaScript related products built on JavaScript. So watch what you're calling for. Like if all of a sudden Meta starts to do the same thing as they're doing with their AIPs, you may want to, you may end up with a world where an ecosystem is broken. The ecosystem that allows you to build that $8.8 trillion value is going to be broken for all of us, and it's not going to be a good space for any of the investors at all.
Yeah, and I think you said it's a pendulum, and that you've seen that in the past. I do see, however, for example, a significant increase with what people call the source available licenses, or FOSS source license, as more formally called by the OSI, and people trying to popularize this notion and maybe challenge the traditional open source definition, or vague, make the lines maybe a bit more vague what it is. This is why I don't like the source available, because people that are not in the details might think source available. Okay, if the source available, it's open source. So I'm wondering, you said it's just a pendulum, you've seen that in the past, but it feels to me at least that this cycle has some sort, and you said the financial incentives, VCs, the backing the organizations, board members, and so on, sort of an increase of pulling the industry, or creating sort of a line that others follow to go down this path, and maybe even try and change the market it as okay, and try to put the lines a bit more vaguely where the open source draws. Do you see that, or is it just me being too pessimistic?
Right. No, I see that, and I see it's all tied to something that Simon Phipps, the OSI's director of policy, calls the what's the name he uses, the rights ratchet model. Rights ratchet model basically means that these corporations follow the same pattern. If you look at that, they start with an open source offering, very liberal licenses in general. Do whatever you want, follow us, it's going to be great in our journey. They build market share, and then as they get, after around 10 years, when they get closer to an exit, whether an acquisition or going IPOs, before or right after, they close the gates, and they try to enforce, to have exclusive exploitation rights. It's a pattern, and we're seeing it all of the since it happens around the 10 years anniversary. We've seen a lot of these changes happening. at 10 years after the very big VC season. But also something else was happening in that VC season between 2008 2020. In that period of time, also the way to use, distribute, and execute software has changed. In other words, the introduction of AWS cloud offerings started to change, and the popularization of software as a service, the distribution of software as a service, changed a lot of the assumptions that are behind the free software definition. And I think these concepts we should, collectively as a community, we should have studied them a little bit more. And this was one of the reasons why OSI started to look very early on. 3 years, when I started at OSI 3+ years ago, I was really interested in looking into machine learning and AI because I thought of the same thing. These things, these systems, they look like software, but they're not exactly the software that we used to. And if we don't look at carefully at this technology, if we don't understand it well enough, chances are that we're not going to have, the definition might fail unpredictably, and we may end up in the same situation where we have cloud or software as a service based companies pushing for stretching the definition to their own needs without having a very clear understanding, without having a very clear answer on our side.
And when you already start seeing that, like we see Meta releasing models under the claim of being open source models, and we see Open AI, the very name hints to something that not necessarily delivers on it, and others. So we do see that, right? Like, what do you think about the various models, without going into the details why, but in general? Do we see these large corporate ones? Do they actually deliver on the promise or the marketing claims of being open source? As far as you see that?
Okay, so you want me to go straight into that conversation because we have to, right? We have to talk about that. Like the models 3 years ago, I saw something that happened was seeing Copilot being like the demo being released by GitHub, and that was one of the triggers. I was like, oh, wait a second, these things are not just identifying cats and labeling things automatically. These are capable of generating functioning code, right? Without getting into the debate of whether it's good code or bad code, but it's actually capable of creating something that looks reasonably good. And that was one thing. And then the other thing that happened was all of a sudden there was an episode where like a father was taking a picture of his son naked to send it to the doctor to ask for information about something, something that was visible on this son's skin, and automatically the system labeled that picture as pornographic material, child abuse material, and blocked that account automatically. So clearly there was a system that was going automatically making decisions that were wrong decisions, right? Yeah. And in my mind, the immediate question was, wait a second, in the 90s, we had an answer for that. We collectively, as advocates of open source, we were immediately going to public administrations or corporations saying, wait a second, if you don't have access to the source code, if you don't have the rights to modify that source code on your own, you will never be able to fix this bug. You will always have to ask for someone to beg them to fix bugs. And we knew what to tell them, right? Ask for the source code, meaning ask for all the scripts, the compilation scripts, all the information about the library dependencies, and try to make another programmer in the same conditions as the original programmer to fix that bug. That's what source code meant. And in fact, open source definition point number 2 says that obfuscated source code is not valid, right? It's not a good thing. It doesn't satisfy the definition. It needs to be the preferred form used by a programmer to modify the software. We didn't know what that preferred form for an AI gone wrong. If an AI goes wrong, we don't know what the preferred form to make modifications to it is. We didn't know at the time, so we needed to start looking into that issue, and we did.
Yeah. And you touched, I think this is the core thing, that the difference between, in open source, the difference between AI than what we know in regular software. And you talked about beyond the code it generates, there's obviously things such as the importance of the training data, understanding the bias, weights. That is obviously a very important topic. So what are the main can you map out for us the main differences that maybe software engineers might not be aware of when talking about open source in the context of AI?
Right. It took us a few years to understand the space, because really there is a lot of confusion, and we needed to, in order to simplify the process of understanding and come up with a definition for what that preferred form of making modifications to an AI is, we needed to start simplifying things. Complex problems cannot be addressed; they need to be simplified first. So we focused on machine learning, and we focused a lot on the conversations around. A lot of the conversation focused on large language models and all these systems that require lots of training data, because these are fairly new and also super powerful. We understood very early on that these are not programmed. In other words, there is no intentional from a human being to say if this then that, right? There is nothing in there. These behave a lot like black boxes to some extent, and we needed to understand what was happening in the black box. And we knew also that we couldn't do this alone. As OSI, we don't have the expertise. We hire only a handful of people. We're less than 10, including and some consultants here and there. We're a nonprofit based in the United States, and we needed to understand the space better, and we needed to get expertise not only from developers but also from experts of data, regulators, people who were making laws, or at least people who worked with them. We needed to talk to philosophers and ethicists, because so many problems are created are visible already, were visible 3 years ago with this technology. We had lawyers, of course, from different domains, not just copyright lawyers, etc. So we had in overall over 100 people working, and we needed to have a very large process that was international. We couldn't really base it only in Europe or the United States. We needed to touch other communities that usually are not touched upon. So we analyzed, the process is all documented. We have just published the report of the year plus investigations that actually started more than 2 years ago. On opensource.org/AI, you will find a report that went to the board that describes in details what happened. But just not to bore you with the details, we squeeze it forward. We found out that the definition of what is the preferred form to modify a machine learning program is basically, first of all, to be open source, it means that it needs to give you the four freedoms, like the freedom to use the system, to study how it works, how it's been built, to modify it to suit your needs, and to give it to others if they may want to use it, right? These are basic freedoms that we understood very early on and agreed upon with this in this design process. Absolutely non-controversial. But in order to use to modify and study, the free software definition requires states that you need access to the source code, right? So there is that little sentence: access to the source code is a precondition for this. And the precondition for machine learning is that you have access to the model weights and parameters, that you have access to the code used to build the data set, the code used for the training of the system, and you have the complete list of data used to train the system and the actual data set when that is possible to share. So all of these components need to be made available to have really the full capabilities of understanding how the system has been built, evaluate the biases, etc., and modify it to suit your needs. Right.
And I think what the last point that you said is maybe the less trivial one, at least for people that come from software engineering background, which is the data piece. And I really liked what you posted about it, and you called it I think the broken social contract of data. And you said for AI to be truly open, developers need access to the same tools and data as the original creators. I really like this very clear statement. And I know that you also went into this deeper about this broken social contract of data in the workshop you just had on the topic on the OSI, right? So are we getting to the, and there are lots of fine detail questions that like how to verify ethical issues of fairness and bias in the data, right? So how do you see people addressing these pains, and how do you see the OSI's opinion on that one?
Right. I mean, this is a very, very complicated topic, and that's why we started studying it. It was clear from the very beginning of the conversation that solving the dependency of the training data through that whole pipeline that builds the weights, the train parameters, is a difficult nut to crack. There are too many laws that are not the traditional laws of open source, and the traditional law of open source are the ones that regulate copyright and patents, right? Those are the traditional ones that we have familiarity with. We know how to build knowledge, and we built legal documents that allow us to kind of jujitsu move, use copyright to expand the rights instead of restrict them, expand the rights of users. With data, the issue is not as simple as copyright. There is no, and there was one episode that was clear to me at one point that we needed to have a little bit more. It was complicated. It was when the poster child of open source AI is this group of hackers called Eleuther AI. They are a nonprofit organization, a 501c3 charitable organization in the United States. And during the pandemic, they have built equivalent systems to the GPTs of OpenAI. Okay. And in order to do that, they had to accumulate a significant amount of data. Like we're talking about almost a terabyte of compressed text. All right. Uncompressed, the whole of Wikimedia is less than, it's a few gigabytes. Okay. Uncompressed text. We're talking about compressed text that is worth almost a terabyte. And that requires a huge amount of data in order to, be able to compete with GPT-2 when it came out. All right. And these guys, while we were talking about data and the dependencies and training data, etc., they got sued by the same people who sued OpenAI, okay, for copyright violation. They had, in fact, used, in order to build this large data set without thinking too much about it, as a loosely connected group of hackers, they have intentionally, accidentally, I don't know the details, but they have used a database of books coming from torrents and unreputable sources, okay? So they've been sued for copyright violation, and that their data set is not available anymore. But all the tools that built it, all the list, the links to the original data, and everything that they have produced is actually in the open, and it's common knowledge, like it's common science that people can build on. So in my mind, they've done nothing wrong, right? They have not deprived users or authors of their of their rights. They have done nothing wrong compared, just like Google did nothing wrong when they did Google Books, right? It's shady, though. I recognize that. So that is the social contract that I've been talking about. The broken social contract. Like we have, I realize that we collectively as society, we have put a lot of ourselves in on the internet publicly, maybe even using permissive licenses and liberal licenses like the Creative Commons CC0, CC BY, saying do whatever you want, as long as you give credit, for example, or just do whatever you want with it, with this content. Now, that was before we knew that someone like OpenAI could use that data, that content, to privatize it, basically, and charge us to get it back, or to get whatever useful they built to get access to it. And that was wrong. That is clearly wrong. On the other side of the spectrum, there was this group, Eleuther AI, taking my donated material, my blog, my face, etc., and giving back everything that they've done, right? So that is more acceptable to me. So at one point, it's not simple, and that's why we started this this analysis at the deeper level. Right? When people ask for when our gut feeling was always that if the parameters of an AI, of a machine learning, are built using code and data, no brainer. Both code and data needs to be open. Okay. But then when you look more carefully into that statement, you're basically saying, GitHub, yep, you can do whatever you want because we signed your rights when we upload our code into GitHub. We give you the right to do whatever you want with it, okay, in the GitHub terms of use. But if you're Eleuther AI, you need to ask for permissions. Is that really what we want? So we're looking into this more carefully. And in fact, the paper that we're about to release talks a little bit more, introduces more nuances, because there is not just copyright. There is also privacy laws. There is indigenous laws. Access to knowledge from indigenous people is different than copyright. There are other laws, and all of these laws are not harmonized across the world. Like, to give you an example, this is a very classic one. People have told us, like, you can build data sets using only public domain material and publicly available material, publicly licensed. Okay. Let's talk about movies. Public domain in the United States expires at different times than public or copyright expires at different times in the United States versus Germany or France. And to calculate the expiration of a movie, copyright of a movie in the United States, that's 70 years after the death of the director. In France, it's 70 years after the death of the last one who worked on the movie.
Oh, wow.
Go calculate that. Like, to be safe,
you need AI just to
go really
calculate
back
it.
to Lumiere. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
No, it's a good example. Yeah.
it's a complex,
And
it's a
you
very
mentioned, by the
complex
way, you
matter.
mentioned sorry, but you mentioned the white paper, and I'm really excited about that. That I think that's the first opportunity to speak about it in public, because it's really coming out these days. By the time the episode will be out, it's already going to be out, and then definitely I'll share the link with all our listeners to delve into that. But that was I know that there was a workshop that you've done, an offsite with many of the people involved in shaping up the definition and the post 1.0 definition, and compiling all the feedback and so on. So maybe can you give us the key takeaways out of the white paper that you've been working on?
In one sentence, open data as a concept is not sufficient. That's one thing. And in fact, we start talking about data governance as a much wider concept. We need to be able to, we need to develop so much more knowledge. We need to investigate a little bit better open data, and restricting open data to training data for an open source AI means reducing the quantity and quality of AI systems that can be open source. And that would be an artificially giving dominance to Llama and OpenAI and Anthropic and all the likes, because they don't have those restrictions. So if we want to have AIs that are open source, that we can learn from, that we can really depend on, we can have some more trust in, we need to allow for data that is governed in a better way, not just open data.
Interesting. And you mentioned, I think, that all the privacy laws, all the tracking the provenance, the tracking the metadata, maybe all these aspects. These are all things that you're now just starting to map out, even what the questions are, even before, I think, defining what the open aspect is, even to understand all the elements of what characterizes the data, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and the laws are getting into that direction too, are forcing on disclosure of data sources. It looks like regulators want to know that, because there's so much liability also from the corporation's perspective. They believe it or not, I mean, we don't think about it because we're software people. We haven't really been diving into the data issues, but there is a whole market of data being exchanged from credit card companies buying or selling our spending habits to marketing corporations or supermarkets chains, in order to better predict the response to pricing, or that those kind of things have happened all the time. And in medical space, it's even more fascinating, the amount of data that is being switched. All of this without much of a regulation or public oversight or standards for traceability, managing the correctly or as expected, the rights to opt out of all of that. All of this is still happening, and we, now that data has become functional, in other words, it can generate new things, we need to pay attention to it. And it's a brand new space. It to me has become like a new space that we need to watch for. And that was absolutely out of scope for OSI before. Like, it was before there was a clear separation between, before machine learning, these types of machine learning, there was a clear separation between your data and the content and the software, right? You use LibreOffice, you write your own books and poems. There is very clearly the copyright of the poem is yours, and has nothing to do with LibreOffice or the Document Foundation. But now, you use WordPress to write something on the web, to publish it on the web, and all of a sudden it could become part, at least in some parts of the world, it could become part of a corpus that generates new text and or recognizes your face on the street. At least in some parts of the world, all of this is legal without even question copyright or other things. It's a new world that if we don't investigate, and by we I mean collectively, not just OSI, but collectively as technologists and people who have, in society in general, if we don't understand it, we will never be able to vote for the candidates in the parliament who are doing the right things, because we don't know what the right thing is. And if we don't do it collectively, someone else will do it for us. And I'm not sure that letting Llama, Meta, or other large corporations say, "Oh, this is good for the world. Trust me, we know better." I don't think that the answers they give us are going to be in our interest anyway.
Yeah, and definitely that's where the OSI has proven that by being the steward of the open source definition, sort of setting the bar and standard that then the corporates needed to align with rather than inventing. Although, as I said, now they're starting to try and reinvent or define their own set of for open source licenses. But I definitely agree. And so the OSI really took early on, identified you and the team identified the this new challenge and came up. I think it was launched last year at All Things Open, the open source definition, the version 1.0, OSAID 1.0. I'm curious, what kinds of responses have you gotten? It's been already quite some time since All Things Open. What did you hear from the community about the definition? What kinds of people endorsed it? What kinds of concerns were raised on that? Can you share a bit about that?
Right. Oh, yeah. So the definition has been built together with a wide array of interest groups. And overwhelmingly, we have seen a very positive set of endorsers. If you look at the opensource.org/AI, you will find the list from research and academia to developers, data providers, and corporations of different sizes and from different parts of the world have been endorsing it. Now, what you will see, the kind of feedback that we have received goes from the criticisms have been, along the lines of there is no source in this thing, so why do you use the open source term? Which is a fair criticism. I hate the term open source AI. I can go on record to say that. But we were also forced to use it because it's so incredibly popular in any case. And we needed to have a definition around that term instead of using my favorite ones, which I'm not going to reveal. And OpenAI was already taken. So let's start from there. The other criticism, but probably the strongest one, has been around the fact that the definition of preferred form of making modifications does not force for training data to be released to be always released. And in other words, there are groups like the Free Software Foundation and Software Freedom Conservancy who have argued in a well thought out posts that would be that's a limitation or a bug, if you want, in version 1 of the open source AI definition. The interesting part of their comments, though, is that they haven't found a solution yet either, and so it's a little bit of this is one of those cases where it's a chicken and egg, right? If you don't come up with something, then someone else will do it for you. If your bar that you're setting is too high, no one will even try to reach it, and your definition will be irrelevant. Or if it's too low, everyone will pass it, and it's irrelevant in any case. So we try to set the bar at a level where it can be reached. And in fact, during the validation phase of the co-design process, we demonstrated that organizations and systems like Olmo from the Allen AI Institute, or the system produced by Eluther AI and LLM 360, they pass the bar easily because they release all the science behind the production of those systems, all the tools, and they give you all the freedoms. Then there are a few others like Bloom and StarCoder who release the data sets or the full list of data used and the tools to rebuild and everything else. But their licenses are non-permissive. So if they change the licenses, they would pass. But until they don't. But also very clearly, systems like Llama, Mistral, and even IBM's Granite, they don't pass the definition because they either have restrictive terms of use like Llama and Mistral, or they don't release all of the required code like Granite. So if you want, one of the criticisms we got is that from some corporations like IBM and others, they haven't been able to engage in the process because it was a little bit too public. That's a fair comment. We worked very quickly, very rapidly, and for a large corporation like Google or IBM to give a comment in public requires lots of conversations across multiple layers of the internal bureaucracy. Said in a non, bureaucracy is not a bad term, and at the speed that we were moving, that was not feasible for most of these corporations. So they couldn't really engage at the level that they wanted to.
Interesting. But the interesting is, on the other hand, is that they are interested in engaging, and that also opened the door for working on the next releases, and that's important. You stated, I think, very clearly. I think I also shared your post on that version 1.0 is just the beginning, and that's just the first draft for initiating this conversation. So I assume that this conversation is ongoing, and also you said there were no one tried to tackle this problem before the OSI started. Now I think there's the opposite definition, that you have several others. You mentioned like the Free Software Foundation and the software freedom controversy, and others that come with alternative definitions or alternative efforts. How is that different? How does that align with what the OSI sees in its definition and its process?
Right now, I don't think that the Software Freedom Conservancy is looking into a new definition. The Free Software Foundation has always had this approach where the free software is not open source. Exactly, they're not exactly the same, and open source is doing it all wrong. But frankly, we're used to having this sort of dual way of looking at things with the FSF and to some extent with Software Freedom Conservancy, but we mean the same things. So I think it's going to take time. In fact, I think it was Bradley Kuhn who just in his blog post said that within a few years, this whole thing, with this whole space, will have a much clearer understanding and much clearer view. So I think it's going to be a matter of time. And again, until the open source AI definition version 1 is the first, it's a stake in the ground, right? It can be wiped and written and thrown away, rewritten from scratch for version 2. It, like in any good software development process, the first one is always a throwaway. What we needed and what it's useful for is a catalyzer for conversations. And in fact, this year, that's what we plan on doing. We plan on watching the space. We want to develop more knowledge about recognizing an open source AI and see where the limitations are. Recognizing what an open source AI means is the system that I am receiving. Does it provide me as an expert in the field, like an AI builder? Does it provide all the tools and freedoms to use, study, modify, and share? We made a hypothesis at the beginning of 2024. We tested it in a validation phase, and the result is version 1. Okay, after some wordsmithing and clarifications. As we use it, as we keep on going as communities, we will know whether IBM is right, and a good, with very detailed technical report with permissively licensed weights is enough to study and modify, or Professor Liang or Eluther AI or other Nathan Lambert and others who say, no, we need to have access to the source code that they built the data set. We need to see how the training has been done. So we need to see the training code. Then we know how to study and modify for real, not just from a technical report. It's going to be a debate that we'll be happily hosting inside the Open Forum for AI, which is an initiative that we have joined with Carnegie Mellon University, or any other space that is available and is interested in collaborating on this.
Makes sense. And you mentioned that a lot of that is also in terms of the the legal aspects, obviously, of the data, and that tightly couples with the legislative work. And we do see legislative work by governments, regulators, governmental agencies, and organizations such as the EU's AI Act. So, can you tell us a bit about the government efforts around the understanding open source AI?
Right. This was an interesting, again, one of the differences that I noticed between software developers and AI developers, and the legislative space around it. Legislators did not care when software started to become popular and the internet was developing. They were kind of caught off guard, but and didn't regulate much, right? And now I think that they are also not happy about it, or catching up rather. But with AI, they moved very early on. It was clear that at least in Europe, but also in China and in some parts of the United States, the risk perception of risk from these technologies being made available to the public so quickly without a full understanding of the mathematics behind it and the science behind it felt uncomfortable for some of the legislators, and they wanted to know more. But at the same time, in Europe, it was, at least for the AI Act, it was clear also that the balance they wanted to keep between maintaining the innovation momentum, preserving the value of open source, and making sure that the risks were not passed on to society in a dangerous way. And keeping this balance left some carve-outs for open source AI, lacking a definition though, which was, again, one of those triggers that forced us to move at a very quick pace. If it was for us in our own, we would have moved at science pace with a decade, if not more, to wait for the software to develop. Like going back to the history of open source, no one was paying attention when Linux was developing Linux in his bedroom, right?
Yeah, but here it's really
Slowly,
the opposite. I think the European Union's AI Act is now already in implementation phase, and I think
exactly.
over 1,000 people were involved, like collaborating, commenting on the documents, and also interesting. It's a EU AI Act, but it's also non-Europeans, right? Experts in the field. So can you tell us where it stands? Because this is,
right.
I guess, maybe the most advanced and probably most broadly impacting one that we have at present.
Yeah. It is really a global law, because even if it's written by the European Union, it affects everyone on the planet. So now it's been approved and published finally in its final form, and now there are 2 years of time to develop the implementation mechanisms that are required. And that is there is now a working group, 4 working groups defining what is called the code of practice for general purpose AI. General purpose AI is another term for foundation models, or the United States they call it. Now it's blank. I'm blanking out. There's another term, but it's foundation models like Llama, models that are powerful, the very powerful, and capable of being taught specific domains. Right? They're the general purpose, but they can be fine-tuned to be more precisely following other domains or other specific tasks. These systems they need to be checked more carefully. And this code of practice is right. These working groups, they're watching things like privacy, copyright, and other issues, so that
Transparency and
guidelines, exactly, so that guidelines can be given to developers, but also to regulators and lawmakers and judges. The courts, when it will come the time to judge.
Yeah. And there's even an AI office now under the EU commissioner, so it's like really designated, specifically focused on this. So the European Union takes it very, very seriously, and
Yeah.
and also the US follows. I think maybe no federal yet, but in state laws and others. So I think we are soon to see similar initiatives in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, we'll see in the United States what will happen at the federal level, but definitely states are legislating on their own.
Nice. So you touched a bit about what's ahead, like what's the roadmap for the open source AI definition. But is there anything else that you want to add about what's next? What people should expect from the OSI in the coming now in 2025 and maybe beyond?
Definitely. So 2025 is the year where we're going to be refocus our energy. So now that this big investment of time and energy on creating the version 1, releasing the version 1 of the open source AI definition is done, now we're going to be widening our scope. We definitely want to make sure that the community knows that we got their back. Like, we haven't really forgotten. Like, some people may have had that feeling that we have forgotten about the other issues, but with definitely the other issues, like doing business with open source. Like, how are we going to be supporting organizations, corporations that are still trying to do the right thing? And so we're going to be supporting that. You will see us having more of the practical open source series that we had last year to support entrepreneurs and maintainers. We are going to be also talking a lot more about licenses and the legal frameworks around licenses for software and for AI systems. We're going to be doing a lot more of outreach with communities and volunteers to help us spread the word about open source and do more of that that is in our educational mission.
Yeah.
So for you, right, for your readers, a reminder that we are one of the very few organizations that has an elected board. In this space, it's very rare. Like the Free Software Foundation, Software Freedom Conservancy, Linux Foundation, they don't have, their board is not elected by its members. And to become a member of OSI, you really only have to donate $50 and up. So it's a very low bar, and we try to keep it low so that we have an international representation. Like, you can become a member even if you're coming from a poor country. And even for that, if you don't have $50 and you're coming from a poor country, we can make exceptions, right? The elections are coming up soon. We're starting this week with announcing the dates. But you can become a member, and you can vote for people. To be on the board, for example.
If you're in one of these organizations, if you're interested, if you think that you can influence, that's the time now. Really launching the board elections. You can propose yourself or someone from your organization that is active in this space. So good call to action to all our listeners there to spread the word out about the upcoming elections to the OSI board. Just for people to know where to follow you before we wrap up, you and obviously the open source the definition and the OSI in general, give us the links on where they should follow you and the organization.
Absolutely. So we are on Blue Sky and Mastodon. You can find us. LinkedIn is also a place that we use quite a bit. We're reducing our engagement on Twitter and X, as it looks like all the mentions we get are not relevant anymore. So it's less of a channel. But opensource.org is our main website. And if I may, I mean, since your audience is used to podcasts, we had a podcast that started the whole process of AI. It still has some very decent, some very good and relevant interviews, and I recommend, if you want to get an introduction to the complexity of the topic, the deep dive open source AI podcast is a valuable resource.
Amazing. So definitely, and the links will also be as part of the show notes. So follow this as well for more. Stefano, thank you so much for joining me on this episode today.
Thanks, Dotan. My pleasure.
Yeah, and I would like to thank all our listeners for joining us on the show. And as always, all the episodes are available on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, wherever it is. And if you do listen to that on these platforms, do know that we stream the episodes live on Twitch and YouTube. So follow us on Twitter or X. Also move to Blue Sky. You can follow there, or LinkedIn to get the live stream times and to stay up to date about more deep dives like this one and follow up links and so on. And definitely looking forward to next month's episode. With that, I'd like to thank you very much. And as always, may the open source be with you.